Hi, and welcome to week 2. This week is all about adding elasticity to the mobility that we began exploring in our fascial lines last week. So that brings up a big question. What exactly do we mean by elasticity? So when we talk about elasticity in our fascial system, what we're talking about is the ability for the fascial tissue to rebound. Healthy fascial tissue should be able to lengthen and then, just like an elasticity, bounce back and strengthen itself. What happens when tissue does not have elasticity is one of two things. The tissue might have been lengthened and lengthened and lengthened and lengthened through so much stretching, so much overstretching, and not enough strengthening that it no longer has this ability to recoil. Think about a really overstretched elastic that no longer can go back to the shape that it was originally. It can no longer bounce back. On the flip side of that, you might have fascial tissue that is so tense and so shortened and tight that it has nowhere to go. So it's at the opposite end. Think of like a shrunken sweater. It no longer can stretch out in order to get that recoil that you're looking at in muscle and in fascial tissue. So a healthy fascial tissue should be somewhere in between overstretched and too tense, too tight, so that when you lengthen it out, you have the ability to find length. But when you ask it to rebound, when you ask it to recoil and be strong, it has the ability to bounce back within itself. So when we talk this week about elasticity inside of your mobility, we'll be looking at doing a lot more movement and rebounding within the stretches that are familiar to you from last week. You might see some of those familiar stretches just with some movement, some flow added onto them. And when we look at the fascial lines, what's really happening, I'll use the front and back superficial lines as an example, is that when the front superficial line is lengthening, say in a back bend, the superficial back line is what's strengthening and creating that elasticity. Then when we come back, we're using the elasticity in the front line to suddenly squeeze ourselves, rebound ourselves back into that line, back into tension, and that's what's creating that good elastic response within the fascia. So you'll see a lot of those movements throughout this week and into next week as we start building that elasticity response. Many of our elasticity work, or much of our elasticity work, is going to be those kind of quick rebounding movements where we're using the energy of the fascia springing back into itself in order to complete the movement. And that action of allowing our body to be that spring system gives us free energy, if you will. If we're using that spring in the fascia appropriately and we've trained it to be nice and elastic, then we use less energy to do the things we want to do because our fascia is able to generate some free energy just with its elasticity. Think about if we go back to an elastic band again, if I pull on an elastic band and then let it go, that elastic band can go flying further, and it's because it's gotten all of this free energy, this free momentum from that rebound effect. So that's really what we're looking for in elasticity this week, is creating an awareness within our bodies and starting to train the fascia to have a little bit more of the elastic response than maybe it already does, whether from its being too tight and understretched, or on the other side of that, perhaps overstretched. Have a great week.